you, General Shamaal, for what is undoubtedly a very thought-provoking and perceptive address. When I began, I introduced you as a scholar soldier, but I should say you are a scholar soldier diplomat from the way in which you very readily acknowledge the contributions of all the three services of the Indian Defence Forces. Ladies and gentlemen, General Shamaal has agreed to take questions as the Maldives embarks on a very bright future. There are many of us who want to be part of that very exciting future. We want to work and collaborate with you. And I'm sure many of you have suggestions and observations to make, perhaps even questions to ask. I request that you frame your questions precisely and permit General Shamaal to address them at length. I invite questions and observations from the floor, briefly, of course. Thank you. Yes.
Thank you, Chair and the Honourable Defence Minister. Very interesting and a very stimulating presentation you had. I have a question in terms of the current transformation you talked about the Defence Forces. When we were following the developments before the democratic elections, we noticed that even the security force being manipulated at that time, into various factions, and the kind of manner in which they are being applied for domestic repression and even for the manipulation of the state institutions. So just wondering what kind of reverberations of that kind of manipulation which actually the security forces experienced that time, how is the present defense forces, how are they presently sort of coping with that and trying to integrate all the different groups or whatever which actually emerged as a result of that manipulation? Thank you.
We'll take a few more questions and bunch them together, and then I'll request the eminent speaker to respond. Gentleman there.
Mr. Gautam Sen, former advisor to the government. General, I had a point. At the operative level, how would you like the security architecture of this region, the SAARC region, to evolve? There's no political consensus on this matter, but on the matters of critical concern to the states, on this, if you would give us some idea.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I got a question which is away from security. Prior to 3rd November 1988, there was no violence in Maldives. I think there was no anger in the Maldivian people. They were very peace-loving, and if I'm not mistaken, do correct me if I'm wrong, the last murder which happened, there was a German murdering girlfriend, and they had not seen violence for hundreds of years. And in the last 3 decades, I would like just to get a feel of what has changed, where the security has become a primary concern.
Kunshan Luthra, I'm with IDSA only. Simple question. I'm sure you have a very good Navy. Your country is so beautiful, I've been there once. How do you do the air patrolling, air cover? That's one. Thank you.
I think we'll take another round, so I'll request General Shamaal to respond to this.
Thank you very much. First of all, to put into context, within the underbelly of this diverse and large South Asian country lies the greater Indian Ocean region. And we all are aware of the strategic significance of the Indian Ocean region, transnational trade, bulk of trade, so much, 60% of, more than 60% of oil being transported in the Indian Ocean region, the slogs and all of it. And Maldives lies right there in the center of the Indian Ocean region. So, first of all, let me try to put it into perspective. Let's say what really drives and what is the dynamics when it comes to Indo-Maldives relations. So, we talk about geostrategic significance of the greater Indian Ocean region, and we talk about the Maldives' strategic real estate value and its strategic location in the Indian Ocean region. So, that makes us, both India and Maldives, more than friends, to put it simply in that way. So that makes us, the geography, the historical linkages, the cultural linkages, long-standing associations, affiliations, and of course Bollywood movies and all that have made us strongly connected. So it's a reality. So the relationship, the preferred relationship between the two countries is not a choice. It's a reality. It's a reality, and there has been a customary security guaranteeing architecture that has existed for decades, if not for centuries. This is quite evident by the prompt and swift responses by the Indian Armed Forces. You just mentioned about 1988 incident. We have seen a fast and quick response and then normalizing the situation. And then again, when it comes to the 2004 tsunami, we've had tremendous effort and dedication by the armed forces officers in supporting and normalizing the situation. And so is the water crisis lately and other issues. So we do have this quite dependent and supportive relationship, and obviously the interdependent rather relationship between the two countries. And specifically going into the question of the armed forces going under reform. Now, we have been going through a painful journey of democracy, but it has bounced back. What we're seeing is people who has decided to restore democracy in the country. And then the journey in itself has been tough. So it has been a learning process. There have been up and downs through the process. And then the security architecture, especially the armed forces itself, where we used to have police as a part of the armed forces, when probably the general visited, the police was also a part of the Maldives National Defense Force. So we've had less understanding as far as the fundamental principles of civil-military relations is concerned. One angle to it. A fundamental principle of civil-military relationship is, especially in a democratic system, is to have civil oversight and civil control, civil guidance over the strategic direction of the armed forces, which is imperative to guide the armed forces. And then to have, due to the lack of resources, due to lack of awareness, education, and then we never had many people within the security structure getting exposed to high intellectual educational institutions in the past. So we have this information and education void too. So we've gone through up and down. So within the armed forces, having a more, the idealistic textbook sort of a security structure, having being accountable, being answerable, being transparent to whatever we do, has been a challenge. And we've struggled, but good thing is that through a process of trial and error, we have been learning. And on that note, I must credit the work that we've done on bringing reform to the greater, wider security sector, and by and large to the armed forces specifically. So that's one area. And the other question is about the regional relations. Now, the newly introduced and most talked about Indo-Pacific strategy. It talks about partnerships. It talks about creating collaborative structures. It talks about and the major tenets of Indo-Pacific strategy, as we see it, is collaboration. Is about economic growth. Is about good governance, and also it's about what underlying is about security cooperation within the Indo-Pacific strategy. So we are seeing much more U.S. engagement, and then, interestingly, connecting the Indian Ocean region with the Pacific region to harness the economic benefits of this new direction, I must say. Yes, we have been extremely peace-loving people in the past, and then quite laid back. We've had isolated island communities on far-flung islands, and even long before terrorism, for example, tourism came, we were quite isolated. We were a quite isolated country. But then with globalization, with connectivity, social media, we as a small state has become quite exposed to all the regional currents, international currents, and what we are today seeing is so deeply connected with what happens around the world. So one issue obviously has been the issue of radicalization, and then the state in the past not being fully able to grasp the, having a true understanding of the security implications it may have. So the issue of radicalization has been a problem, and on the other hand, we've got this more spontaneous, connected, more vibrant, which has its cons and pros, the youth. And for all these issues, and then world by and large, with the end of the Cold War, and then moving into an era of transnational and hybrid threats, where we are in an era of finding it a dilemma to clearly demarcate and define the difference between an external threat and internal threat. And we are in a dilemma of understanding, the conventional and unconventional ways, means when we mention about strategy. And at the same time, we are seeing non-state actors, rogue elements, and other much less understood forms of hybrid threats that are being taking a center stage. So for all these menaces, Maldives is a vulnerable country. Like I mentioned, we have a huge, vast EEZ. And then monitoring and keeping an efficient vigil of this vast EEZ is a challenge. I think that let me come to the other question of the vast economic zone. I'm coming, hopefully I'm moving to the fourth question. I hope I have noted it down. Now, surveillance has basically monitoring this vast EEZ has two aspects to it as we see it. One is monitoring, efficiently keeping, detecting our greater, larger maritime zone, keeping and efficiently monitoring the menaces of the vast EEZ. That's one aspect to it. Then the other dimension is to having the capacity to intercept. In case something happens, to constitute and convene the capacity to intercept. So, not having either of these capabilities keeps the country extremely vulnerable. First of all, you need to know about threat before trying to deal with it. So we are in a rush. We are hurriedly trying to see how we can collaborate with, especially with the Indian Navy and the Indian Coast Guard, to see how we could, and with other mechanisms, how we could see. In fact, aerial surveillance mechanisms has been established for a while now in the country. We've been undertaking in an institutionalized manner. We've been undertaking search and rescue operations with the Indian Navy for quite a while, and then we believe that these operations, surveillance operations, need to be further enhanced. So it is a pressing issue, and we need to address in a much more holistic and a much more pragmatic manner. I hope I have in short, unless others have something to say. Would you like to comment?
Yes, I think specifically coming to the issue of civil-military relations, and I think the General has given the broad direction of where the armed forces are headed. Professional military education has been a major concern for the Chief, and he has been focusing keenly on that. The other aspect is who is the manipulator. I think by and large, throughout our years of the painful democratic consolidation, our public has also become more nuanced, and they have become more knowledgeable about how the systems and the processes work. So the manipulation of the system as such, I don't think the Maldivian public would be receptive to those in the future. And even now, there's more debate on these aspects as well. The other thing is, when we look towards this, is having a neighbor like India, which has a very well-established, long-standing democratic tradition, is really helpful, and we see it as a symbol of where we want to head in that direction. So I think we are trying to influence both aspects. One is what we can do within the security agencies to avoid ingress into our forces. The other is educating the public, which of course the armed forces, we are doing it in domains that are concerning to us. The other is through the institutions, through the educational institutions, through the democratic mechanism. So I think that if I have answered your question, sir.
Thank you. I think there's scope for another round if you're willing to give it a go. The gentleman there.
I'm Dr. Raghuvan Sinha from Hindustan Times. Sir, traditionally Maldives has had India first policy, but over the last 2 decades, we have seen the Indian Ocean, the strategic situation in Indian Ocean changing dramatically, and the fact is that China has become a big factor. Do you think in the coming years now, this India first policy from the military point of view, is not about, because it's not about intention, it is about potential. The Chinese do have a large potential in that region now, with having bases in Djibouti and so on and so forth. Do you think that India first policy, Maldives would have to calibrate this India first policy now in the change scenario?
Ashok.
General Shamaal, I have a small question to ask you. In fact, we keep hearing about, you refer to radicalization processes also around us, which is posing a threat to us, a security threat to us. We keep hearing a lot of things about radicalization in Maldives as well. We have heard about this destruction of idols, the destruction of cultural artifacts, and there is a particular political party which has started embarking on that path. How would you assess this process of radicalization taking place in Maldives at the moment? Like, what state it is in, and what kind of a future you would predict for it, and what is the role of the security forces in curbing such kind of influence? Like, I understand in the democratic process, such elements are going to mobilize people in the name of religion and all. So in that context, I'm asking this question to you. Thank you.
Colonel Gautam.
Thank you, Chair. General Shamaal, thank you for your talk. About 10 years ago, there was a minister from Maldives, I don't remember his name, here at Asian Security Conference. He had presented a jar of your soil to IDSA, so that once you go underwater, that is the memory we will keep. So my question is, what are you planning about when the sea level rises, Khotana Khasta? I mean, what will you do? Because probably you're on coral reef, you're higher than Tuvalu. But what is your plan? And in negotiations, whom are you blaming? Mitigation and adaptation. So what do we do? Because now the climate change is a real problem, but nobody is talking about it. You just mentioned that there's no research. And 10 years back, your minister gave a jar to IDSA.
Thank you. We'll take one more from there. I see so many people here. All right, very quickly, please. Come on.
Thank you, Chair. Sir, my question is, as one of the members of Vulnerable 20 group, could you please share your perspective on Osaka Declaration on Climate Change, which grossly neglected that issue and focused more on trade and other issues?
Dr. Adil Rashid.
Thank you, sir. I just wanted to ask you about, you talked about liberal democracies and your society being liberal and inclusive. I just want to know, clarify some of the information which I have. My information may be incorrect. But as we know that Maldives is almost 100% Sunni Muslim country. And there is also some legislation which has been a concern. In 1994, the Religious Unity Act. actually gives a death penalty to any citizen who does not say that he's a Muslim. So the problem with radicalization, it has its roots from the very time the country became independent. The other concerns are that the people who are returning from Syria, Iraq, and even Afghanistan back to Maldives, they have been roaming rather free, and the cases against them, they have been able to get favorable judgments. People like Ahmad Latif, I read here, Sohail Musa, and others who have been in the Taliban theater for 10 years, they have come back and they have been rather roaming free. There is also a lot of this website applications, Murtad Watch and others, which actually give information that if someone is not following Islam, they are being blacklisted and others. What is the Maldivian government doing about all this? Thank you.
Thank you, sir, and thank you, General, for a very comprehensive presentation. I have two quick questions for you. One, you all mentioned the professional military education aspect. Considering India and the Maldives have had a long tradition in exchange of capacity building, I was wondering, are there areas, specific areas within the spectrum that you think need to be focused more in terms of what India can do? Second, if you could tell us a little more about the India-Maldives Defence Action Plan and the way it's going forward, your assessment.
Thank you. I think you have a large number of questions. I hope you'll take them all on.
On the first question of India First policy. Now, as I mentioned, due to our interconnected and historic traditional linkages, and more importantly, the geography of our two countries, it compels, it's not a choice. India, making India as our first priority and making Maldives as an important partner, it's not by choice, it's by strategy and by intellectual level intelligent thinking. Now, we have seen with Prime Minister swearing in for the second time, and then his first visit to Maldives. And this is my second visit since taking over. And I had first visited with the Honorable Defense Minister, and we talked about the future of our security and defense and security cooperation. And as well as, and after that, I had come here, and then we've had extremely fruitful meetings yesterday, meeting the service chiefs, the National Security Advisor, as well as the Honorable Defense Minister. And as we talked about the democratic consolidation, and we talked about the journey to democratic maturity, we've had, it is a struggling and painful process in itself. It has its voids. And then we are seeing the geostrategic landscape of the region changing too. And with that, we've seen undemocratic elements or undemocratic approaches, ways and means creeping into our systems as well, which we are quite aware of, and we would certainly be, I mean, at the national level, this will be taken, it has been taken into consideration. What we're seeing is that people has decided, and the democracy has, by and large, bounced back. And on the issue of environmental degradation, now the Intergovernmental Panel on on climate change has declared 2 degrees Celsius as a benchmark, which needs to be considered as a red line bar. And we are talking about a threat that may be about 50 years away from now. And I'm not actually the right person to deeply comment on environment as a person in uniform. But then we are also sort of aware on, or when we talk about broader security issues. And but most of the scientists refer 1.5 degrees Celsius as an alarming benchmark too, which may have the same consequences. And which means we are talking about 15 to 20 years. So that 50 years have become much more closer. And on different platforms, different forums, Maldives at government level has tried to alarm the concerned Osaka conference was one such platform. And then you've seen on media that we've had underwater cabinet meetings, and recently the armed forces, within the armed forces, we were holding some of our ceremonies under the water. We had a graduation ceremony of a basic diving course where we had representation from many countries, that includes India, Sri Lanka, Nepal, and some countries. And I had gone under and given the badges under the water. It's on the YouTube. So we are very environmentally cautious. We are a very environmentally cautious society, and it is a dilemma. It is a concern, and then at different levels we try to alarm and then bring the attention of the international community. Now, on the issue of radicalization, it is a complicated and complex issue. Now, from a security point of view, there has been tremendous, in the past few months, there has been tremendous effort put in to put in place a security sector development agenda, which targets, one of the main focuses of the SSR efforts at different levels is to address the issue of terrorism, countering terrorism. And we have talked about this on the Maldives Partnership Forum as well. We do not take terrorism as a stand-alone concept or as a stand-alone separated issue. We want to understand terrorism as the ultimate manifestation of a greater ideology, which is driven by a greater, more precarious ideology. If so, there needs to be a lot of effort done at the softer dimension, which would include discrediting the narratives, the ideology. So at the helm, at the center of the security sector reform work when it comes to countering terrorism remains empowering the softer dimension and then countering the ideology, countering the extremist ideology. For that needs all the agencies to come together, that needs a lot of work to be done. So now the National Counterterrorism Center, which has been established a few years back, it has been playing a significant and a pivotal role on that note. But at the same time, the armed forces, especially the military, is at the extreme end of this spectrum. We have a responsive mandate. If something happens, how we could deal with it. So our primary focus is on response. How we could, for example, something happens on a far-flung, luxurious, high-end resort, how we could provide logistics, how we could reach this island, how we can enhance it, build operational capacity. So that's but at the same time, we have deputed officers within the NCTC working on this, and then we have quite a big pool, large pool within the armed forces who have had intellectual exposure on security sector development, who have had exposure, educational exposure on countering terrorism and this subject, so which is a bonus for the armed forces. Probably that's one of the reasons we've been able to talk about this topic here as well. And so we believe that softer dimension needs to be empowered, but that does not mean the kinetic. That does not allow us to give less prominence to the kinetic dimension. We need to empower the kinetic dimension. We need to create systems how we could efficiently respond. So on that note, we've tried to, like I mentioned, we've tried to amend the existing counterterrorism law, which will be a major achievement, and especially which would give more powers for the police when it comes to enforcement, identifying people like the gentleman was mentioning here, to take necessary enforcement action when it is necessary. And then it will help the security agencies to collaborate, share information, share intelligence, and will be a more holistic approach towards that. Yes, on professional military education, we've discussed about sending of senior military officers to various institutions. We haven't had an officer at the National Defense College for a while. We've discussed about getting the opportunity to send officers to a National Defense College and perhaps giving more exposure on current trends on civil-military relations and the changing trends and trajectories in the international strategic environment. So one area is the National Defense College, and then we would be sending to other training programs in India too.
Yes, specifically addressing the issue of climate change, I think Maldives is a leading figure in that role. But so if you see on the international arena, we have major powers that have the ability to influence. Some of them are actively dismantling the environmental regimes, the protection regimes that states have tried to create. And the other thing, this is the classical case of tragedy of commons. Like there are very credible scientists that are proving like measures such as taxing the carbon emissions. This will have very significant impacts on the global warming. But again, moving ahead, these are not issues that small states like Maldives, we can advocate for this, but ultimately this has to be a decision that is made by the international community. Moving on to the issue of radicalization, systems, processes and institutions, that is what we are looking for in terms of dealing with any security threat. And I think Maldives has, over the past 10 years or so, has made significant improvement in these things. The Prevention of Terrorism Act in 2015 was a landmark achievement in countering in the ability to give the law enforcement the necessary power to apprehend foreign terrorist fighters, specifically the financing of terrorism, these things that the older Act, 1990 Act lacked. The other thing was intelligence sharing, interagency mechanisms has been established. Our chief mentioned the National Counterterrorism Center. So within it we have the software elements, the Ministry of Education, Islamic Affairs, Home Ministry, as well as the civil society. If you go back and read the Preventing and Countering Violent Extremism strategy of the National Counterterrorism Center, it is a very comprehensive strategy that outlines our stakeholders as well as our focus areas. The third thing is specifically dealing with foreign terrorist fighters. I think this is an issue that the international system as a whole is dealing with. There are mutual legal assistance agreements that we require with other countries. Getting information or evidence about a person is very crucial if you want to prosecute him in a court of law. And of course, the training of judges and prosecutors is something, capacity building is something that we have been doing on continuously. The United Nations Office for Drug and Crimes has been our key partner, the UN. We have been working through the UN system. India has also been a key partner in this. We have established working mechanisms with the Indian Intelligence Bureau as well as the multi-agency center here. So I think if you look at this from a holistic perspective, we have been able to develop our systems, procedures and institutions. But still, as a complex threat that terrorism is, there are several lacunas, and I think this needs to be addressed at the national level as well as the international level.
If I can just add a little more. For example, looking into Maldives context as far as the terrorism is concerned. Now, Maldives is a 100% Muslim country. It's a predominantly Muslim country. And then, if you compare, for example, with what happened in Sri Lanka, it's different. Our context is different. Normally, keeping aside the lone wolf scenario, but generally, an eventuality is the ultimate manifestation of frustration or perhaps something. So that's what we saw, for example, in Sri Lanka. We saw these minor rivalries within the Islamic communities, Buddhist communities, and Christians as well. But then the people who indulged in this, in that event, were like, they were coming from wealthy families as well. They were educated people too. But looking into our context, the situation is a bit different. Different because the threat itself is very complicated and complex. And it has the ability to transform. It has the ability to transform. It has the ability to blend into the society. So we may not need exactly the same structures, but obviously there are common understanding and consensual arrangements as far as responsive and countering mechanisms are concerned. But then we need to study and explore the Maldives context more deeply. For example, we have quite far-flung islands where we may have a population of about 600 people or 500 people. and who are extremely isolated and vulnerable. And on the other hand, we also have these high-end tourist resorts where we get all these international celebrities and high-profile people. And there are these vulnerabilities. So to deal with this issue, it has to be a multidimensional, multifold approach, holistic. But we cannot leave any segment of it, the responsive segment of it when it comes to the security forces. But at the same time, the softer dimension, the legal work, all. So it is a tough job. It is a tough effort. But the good thing about it is we are working on it. We are working quite diligently on it. The NCTC has been quite empowered. We've supported the NCTC. We've been able to working on amending the existing counterterrorism law. We've been able to bring all the agencies together. We've been able to see how intelligence and information can be shared, how it can be fusioned. So there is a great deal of effort at the moment going on. But then it is a complex and a complicated threat we are talking about. I hope that has given further.
Thank you, General Abdulla Shamaal, for those very erudite remarks. You would all agree with me that these erudite remarks came from a thinking general, and I personally was deeply impressed by your remarks and comments. And on the subject of terrorism and radicalization in particular, I took note of the point that you made that our response must be multi-domain, multi-agency, whole of government, whole of society, in fact whole of the region approach. And in this regard, I would like to suggest that IDSA and relevant counterparts in the Maldives see how best they can work together in the future for the benefit of both countries. Ladies and gentlemen, this unfortunately brings us to the end of this remarkable session that we have had. I hope we can do this many times more in the future during your future visits. And I think I will now request the MC to take over again. Thank you.